when I looked on it, I said, that is what you go and do there. Télévision NTN avec nous ici enfin côté Kai Concert Kitchen après-midi puisqu'il commence bon matin mais quand nous te double bonheur nous pas côté nous rester ça c'est il pas qu'à fait comme la coutume en Kai Concert c'est en ville Castille puisqu'il a ni travail qui a fait à sous maison avec Kitchen jodi en maison administration finance c'est maison Pointe fin côté Tadel aussi la côté maison aussi l'éclaté avant avec bon matin la tenue différent puisque comme la coutume il était fait même quand il a fait un Kai Concert avec mais ça qui était plus gros discussion qui était émotion d'émotion c'est une pour garantir pour le gouvernement faire mettre non de supporter pour le gouvernement prêter ça c'est pour NIC prêter pour c'est banque développement excusez-moi pour un loan de 20 millions de dollars pour assister et puis Kai avec l'autre bagage comme ça Virgil ici avec moi mais Kai commencé à présent nous avons ça Jean et puis speaker day pour ça veut dire nous avons commencé à présent.
Good afternoon, members. Minister for Commerce, Manufacturing, Business Development, Cooperatives and Consumer Affairs.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I would like to join other speakers before me in recording my congratulations to Ms. Julian Alfred on winning 2 medals for herself and for St. Lucia. Olympic medals, silver and gold. Mr. Speaker, it was really a joy to see how St. Lucians, both at home and abroad, came together with pride. It was a moment of history that all of us would be etched in our memories for our lifetime. Mr. Speaker, the performance of Ms. Alfred, I believe, is a motivation for our young people. Her resilience, her tenacity, her humility are attributes that worth emulating. For me, I look forward to her continued success. And more than anything else, I look forward to the success of our other Olympian hopefuls. Mr. Speaker, I beg to present for first reading a bill shortly entitled Cooperative Societies.
Cooperative societies.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move for the suspension of Standing Order number 48-2 to allow the bill to go through its remaining stages at this sitting.
Honorable members, the question is that Standing Order 48-2 be suspended in order to allow the Minister for Commerce to proceed with the remaining stages of the bill at this sitting. And now for the question, as many as that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Leave is granted. Please proceed, Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to present for second reading a bill shortly entitled Cooperative Societies. Mr. Speaker, I am aware that I am standing between this Honorable House and cricket.
The former takes priority.
I understand that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the bill for consideration is a Cooperative Societies Bill, and the purpose of the bill is to make new provisions with respect to the registration, supervision, regulation, governance, operation, and management of the cooperative society. Mr. Speaker, this new cooperative societies bill has been in the works for some 11 years. And Mr. Speaker, it is the practice of my government, the characteristic of my government, to adopt a consultative approach when we present and work on matters impacting the people of St. Lucia. As such, Mr. Speaker, various versions of the bill were sent to key stakeholders over the past 2 years in particular for their comments. And I want to report today that their comments were incorporated when we first presented this bill almost a year to the date. On 12 September 2023, this bill was tabled in this Honorable House. Mr. Speaker, the bill is a huge one with some 322 clauses under 15 parts, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, subsequent to the first reading, my ministry, in collaboration with the Attorney General's chambers and the Financial Services Regulatory Authority, facilitated meetings with stakeholders, including the St. Lucia Cooperative League, the SDA Cooperative in particular, to discuss concerns and recommendations. And I stand here today to present a bill that is of interest to all the people of St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, allow me to thank key persons in formalizing this bill before us: the Minister of Finance and my cabinet, the permanent secretaries of Finance and the permanent secretaries of the Ministry of Commerce, the Director of Legislative Drafting Units and his team, past and present executive directors of the Financial Services Regulatory Authority and the Registrar of Financial Cooperatives and their teams, the St. Lucia Cooperative League, representatives of other credit unions, representatives of non-financial cooperative sectors, and staff of my ministry, in particular our senior legal officer who's present here today. Mr. Speaker, this bill before us, when passed, would replace the Cooperative Societies Act, which is currently in force and which was enacted in 1999 as Act number 28 of 1999. Mr. Speaker, this 1999 Act had for many years served as the Bible for the cooperative movement. It saw the growth of the movement from a very minor sector to a sector which is $1 billion sector. With some information on the sector now, Mr. Speaker. The credit union sector is a critical player within the financial sector, and it provides an avenue for alternative means of savings and wealth creation. As at December 2023, we had some 16 credit unions here in St. Lucia with 1 credit union league. Mr. Speaker, the growth of the sector from 2013, total assets of just over 552 million to the assets now at 1.6 billion, a growth of 199%. While, Mr. Speaker, during that period, loans has moved from 439 million to $1.176 billion, an increase of 168%. Mr. Speaker, at the passing of the 1999 Act, and prior to this enactment, all cooperatives were treated equally, with non-financial and financial cooperatives being administered under a single registrar and regulated by the Department of Cooperatives. Mr. Speaker, you and others in this room may recall the 2008 global financial crisis. In June of that year, Mr. Speaker, the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank Monetary Council insisted that the Caribbean Conference of Credit Unions, with urgency, develop a draft model cooperative societies bill to be finalized by the ECCB by that year, 2008. Mr. Speaker, we are now in 2024. The aim of this proposed bill, as I want to especially focus on, is the enhancement and sustainability of credit unions by improving requirements relating to licensing and reporting, creating practical criteria, and strengthening implementation of the legislation. Mr. Speaker, one may ask, why do we need to strengthen prudential supervision of credit unions? As with that of banks, the main reason is to protect the savings of members and to maintain the sustainability of the financial system. Mr. Speaker, in 2008, America's financial and economic structure caught a cold, and by 2009, our region started to sneeze. In early 2009, the CL Financial Group based in Trinidad and Tobago collapsed and caused the failure of its subsidiary, British American Company and Colonial Life, within the OACS region. Mr. Speaker, many St. Lucians suffered fate because of this collapse. Many St. Lucians lost all their savings. And Mr. Speaker, I must say the member for Beaufort South would be able to provide even additional information on this time and what happened here. Mr. Speaker, these concerns of the vulnerability of national and regional financial sector was not limited to credit union movements. As a result, St. Lucia in 2011 created by enactment the Financial Services Regulatory Authority, what we call the FSRA. Recognizing the need for additional regulatory scrutiny for credit union sector, the Cooperative Act was amended to recognize the FSRA as the Registrar of Financial Cooperatives. And that's a sector we call credit unions. Mr. Speaker, the provision of the 1999 Act have come to be seen as insufficient to deal with the developing regulatory landscape for financial organizations. Mr. Speaker, the increase interest in the vulnerability of the sector and perception of inadequate corporate governance and international standards within the sector have necessitated the introduction of increased checks and balances within the cooperative sector. With these reasons, Mr. Speaker, we could not ignore the request of the ECCB to have a new act. And as such, from 2013, upon receipt of the approved harmonized bill, consultation commenced on the review and tailoring of the bill to facilitate the development of a workable piece of legislation for St. Lucia. In 11 years of consultation, which has intensified over the past 2 years. Mr. Speaker, you and others will note that I have ensured on many occasions to distinguish between financial and non-financial cooperatives. We need to appreciate that many of the financial and corporate governance measures being introduced to the sector are geared at improving governance and monitoring of credit unions, and that some of these provisions would be too onerous for our smaller and less resilient, less robust non-financial cooperatives, such as the farmers' cooperatives and the fisher cooperatives. Mr. Speaker, accepting the role of the FSRA as the Honorable Minister of Finance with responsibility for financial cooperatives, on many occasions throughout this bill has ensured that non-financial cooperatives are treated differently than financial cooperatives. Mr. Speaker, the notable changes in this new act starts with Clause 7, subsection 10. There we see the registrar afforded the powers, after giving a board of directors the opportunity to be heard at a meeting, to remove from office all or any director, where upon an examination of a cooperative society or on receipt of information, the registrar is of the opinion that the funds of the cooperative society are not being managed properly or are not being protected. At clause 55(1) and clause 56, we see reference to the Money Laundering Protection Act. Mr. Speaker, the current Cooperative Society Act makes no provision in relation to measures to counter money laundering and combating the financing of terrorism. Though a credit union is classified as a financial institution under the Money Laundering Act and must comply with the provisions of the Act, having provisions in the substantive bill that governs cooperative will allow for greater compliance. Mr. Speaker, at clause 97, we see increased internal control systems, including an independent and effective internal audit function, all part of sound corporate governance and prudent fiscal management. At clauses 108, 109, and 110, we see the registrar being afforded the authority to conduct due diligence inquiries on the nominated members to ensure that persons elected to the board of directors and various committees are of fit and proper character. Mr. Speaker, delinquency has been an area of concern in the credit union sector. Clause 168 allows the registrar to issue guidance to ensure credit unions make adequate provision. Clause 197, investment of funds. There, the credit union is given flexibility to invest surplus funds, which can result in higher returns to the credit union and which would redound to higher dividends to its members. At clause 203 of this bill, we see the introduction of a stabilization fund which will be used for strengthening the solvency and capacity of each cooperative society, to improve competitiveness and growth among registered cooperatives, and to strengthen the soundness of cooperative societies and the security of their members. Mr. Speaker, one of the limitations of the current Cooperative Society Act is that it does not include a deposit guarantee facility. Mr. Speaker, it is submitted that it has been necessary to establish a deposit guarantee facility for credit unions to provide insurance against the loss of part or all of depositors' deposits. Mr. Speaker, Clause 206 creates such a facility. Clause 272 offers clear criteria as to when the registrar can appoint a receiver manager to protect the interests of members. Mr. Speaker, these and other clauses seek not to destroy the movement, as some people thought, nor to increase bureaucracy, but to provide a suitable framework and governance structure for the sector to grow to the next level. Mr. Speaker, with the enactment of the harmonized bill last year in Anguilla, St. Lucia now stands as the last and lone state yet to enact a version of this harmonized framework. Mr. Speaker, we cannot delay compliance with regional and international standards any longer. Mr. Speaker, with the passing of this bill, we would usher the St. Lucia cooperative movement into the next stage, and it brings me great pleasure to be part of the enactment of the regime that will structure the construction of further expansion of the credit union movement. Mr. Speaker, I believe that after the passing of this bill, stalwarts such as the founder, and I'm mentioning here founding members of the CSA Credit Union, now Janu Credit Union, Sir Julian Hunt, Francis Compton, Emmanuel Theodore. I believe stalwarts like our past Registrar of Cooperatives, Teresa Mason, past members like Rosamond Taylor, who for decades joined persons like Victor Poyot, Kingsley St. Hill, your humble servants, in giving voluntary service to Janu Credit Union in the little yard at the Chaussee Road, Mr. Speaker, and the 100 of volunteers who serve their credit unions throughout the country. When I think of persons like Mr. Prosper and Mr. Philippi of the Fosheja Credit Union, Mr. Elivic of the Labrie Credit Union, I think of Ms. Sylvester Seri, Nee Amos of Monrepo, the late Cyril Matthews, and others, Mr. Speaker. These stalwarts would have their concerns that the credit union movement is shifting. But I know that they will be happy that we are putting a foundation in place for the next level. All of us here have seen the growth of the credit union sector. We have seen how they have, and some of them saying, we are better than the banks. Mr. Speaker, it is my humble hope that on the passing of this piece of legislation before us, I urge members to support the Cooperative Societies Bill, and I look forward to the next level of growth of the credit union sector. I thank members.
Honourable members, the question is that the Cooperative Societies Bill be read a second time. Member for Vieux Fort South and Deputy Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I had not intended to speak on this bill for a number of reasons. But having heard the member for Soufriere presenting the bill, I really can't resist to offer a few comments. You know, I have always said that I'm faithful to what I preach, and I'm no hypocrite. And I don't intend, as the twilight approaches, to be any hypocrite. I will speak frankly, fearlessly, no matter who says what or what responses and my comments may elicit. Let me say at the very outset that I have no major serious intellectual issues with this bill. And there is evidence that great effort has been made in drafting it, even if I may have serious intellectual issues regarding the underpinnings of the bill. But I do take issue with some things. First, in my earlier life, I have always cautioned about this mindless uniformity that is sweeping the region. That somehow you must do things because others say you have to do it, or that there is seeming regional agreement that we proceed in that direction. And I say this without reservation because those who has had the opportunity to sit next to me in previous governments would have heard me preach this constantly to the cabinet that I had the opportunity to chair. That St. Lucia must never ever be afraid to stand alone and to be different. If it has to be. If our reputation for excellence is to be jealously guarded and protected, we must have the courage to be different. And for that reason, when you see efforts have been made to push down our throats all kinds of legislation in the name of uniformity, we then have to take a step back, reflect, and decide whether it is in our best interest. That has always been my guiding principle, and it's nothing new. It's because where I am today that I say this. And the minister is absolutely correct when she says that this piece of legislation has been in the works since 2013. And when you look at a piece of legislation in the works that has taken 11 years to reach the House, then you can well understand the complexities that have been involved. The other one that I'm really waiting for is for the public service bill. Because that one, instead of 11 years, that one has been in the offing for over 25 years. And I will wait for that one then to make my comments about why it had to take 25 years for that bill to reach the House. So, Mr. Speaker, it has been in the works, and I will say that I am one of those who resisted this legislation in its initial incarnation because essentially the first draft was anti-credit union. It was a naked attempt by the central bank and the financial authority here to seek to control credit unions, which I do not support, because I believe that kind of control is robbing people of their ingenuity, of their spontaneity, of their imagination. And it is typical of this brazen effort by these entities to seek to control the lives of people throughout this region in this drive to this mindless uniformity of which I speak. It is you agree, Mr. Minister of Finance? Be careful, because those words may haunt you down the road. It may haunt you, those words may haunt you down the road. And for that reason, Mr. Speaker, St. Lucia, I think, has to be very careful. And I will give you another example of how dangerous mindless uniformity is. I go back again to that period, 2011-2016. St. Lucia presented a proposal to the central bank in 2011-2012 that there be uniform legislation to deal with toxic assets. The central bank accepted the proposal from St. Lucia to see how we could have uniform legislation throughout the OECS to deal with this issue, because St. Lucia had some of the most backward legislation in the region to deal with toxic assets, going way back to our civil code enacted all the way in 1879. And it's an issue we have not had the courage to resolve. So it is not surprising that you have some of the highest delinquency rates in the banking system in St. Lucia compared to a lot of other countries, because the banks are not able to offload toxic assets as quickly as they should because of this problem. The central bank accepts the proposal, but then proceeds to appoint consultants who then recommends that the system of registration of land be altered from what it is to move in a different direction. I think they were proposing that we adopt what exists in Dominica, when St. Lucia had one of the most efficient systems of land registration in the region, much like what Antigua has, and which has been the subject of considerable commentary by the Privy Council in recent times because of property issues reaching the Privy Council. St. Lucia never asked for that. Never asked for any interference with its land registration system. I vetoed it. I said, this ain't happening here, not under my watch. And some months ago, I see they tried to resurface this proposal until I think the Bar Association developed some umbrage and decided that's not happening. Why? Because they cannot understand that we have a different system of property law. Our property law may go back to 1879, but it is one of the most progressive in the world because our property concepts are clear and defined. We don't belong to this colonial world regarding property, where people have a concept of property law born in feudalism. That's not us. It's never been like that. And mind you, our drafters are just as guilty, because when you see they present things in this house, often what they do is to use these outmoded English concepts and try to implant it in our legal system. Somebody has to be vigilant. So, Mr. Speaker, I say to St. Lucia, be careful. I say to St. Lucia, do not be afraid to be different. I say to St. Lucia, never be part of any mindless uniformity. When we decide to join the bandwagon, our history of exceptionalism is lost. Why on earth do you think we have two Nobel laureates? Because we are different. Well, there'll be a lot to say about Julian and Alfred in the next few days. I gave you a motive to extend what I have just said when Julian and Alfred arrives. So you go on in that direction. But we mustn't be afraid to be different. And that's my point. The second thing, Mr. Speaker, is this. The minister aroused my passion because I thought she was rather cautious when she started to give tribute to who shaped what, etc., and who are the pioneers, and so on. I hear all kind of names being mentioned. But you know, I've come to understand that in this society, nobody talks for you if you don't talk for yourself. That's the tragedy of this society. That is the tragedy of it. I heard the minister mentioning some Johnny-come-latelys to the credit union movement. I'm not going to repeat the names, but they know themselves very well. When the Library Credit Union was around, the people who were responsible for the Library Credit Union was Hilary Dasheville, Rudy John, Watson Louis, and a fellow called Kenny Anthony. To this day, I have my cooperative book. Well, I don't know about Musa. He's a Johnny come lately, but what's his number? 202. Well, if his number is 202, mine is 0068. So when you hear those things, you have to wonder. The second related point to this is this. Maybe I should have reason to be a little, shall we say, emotional about this. Because again, I say, you have to speak for yourself. The whole set generation who want to wipe away history like that. They just want to wipe away as if it never happened. The fact of the matter is that the bill you are repealing, I drafted it. The bill that is under repeal was drafted by Kenny Anthony when Kenny Anthony was at the University of the West Indies at K-Bill. That 1999 bill came into effect because at the time there were major readjustments as well in the credit union for some of the reasons that you have cited. So you may say to me deja vu. It is not deja vu for the very simple reason that the landscape has changed so dramatically, especially in relation to the credit unions that have been established. And of course, I heard the minister talking about teachers' union. I believe it is the member for Castries East. Somewhere this morning made mention of former trade union leaders in credit unions and the rest of it. And there was some acknowledgement of a Kenny Anthony who used to be president, I believe, of the teachers union. But what they will not tell you is that the institutions that the St. Lucia Teachers Union have today were in fact fashioned by a Kenny Anthony in a constitution that was drafted by a Kenny Anthony, which to this day is the constitution of the St. Lucia Teachers Union. And they have made amendments to it, obviously, over time. But they won't tell you all those things. You don't hear those things. Recently, I think the Teachers Union invited me to some function or the other, some media function, and what am I doing in the media function? But I was preoccupied otherwise. So, Mr. Speaker, when you talk of people who have contributed and have done things, I mean, You have to pick and choose, obviously. But picking and choosing don't mean you deny or pretend that X, Y, Z don't exist. Don't be part of this wave to pretend a certain history don't exist. That's unnecessary. That is unfortunate and unnecessary. The third general point that I wish to make, Mr. Speaker, is this. I have come to appreciate that someone has to speak on behalf of the citizens to protect their interests against these bodies that we are creating left, right, and center. And when the minister presents her bill to deal with real estate, I will speak to that matter, because there are some issues that I have with that legislation. You see, I think that the problem we seem to be creating is that we are rendering people impotent and defenseless. In a very agreeable mood, member of Castrizis.
What part you agree with?
Impotent part?
Because you come in.
Mr. Speaker, I invite you to translate what a member for Swazella has said. I can't understand what he means by what he has just said. But Mr. Speaker, I leave it to the honorable members to explicate and explain to me in all my innocence what this means. So, Mr. Speaker, as I was saying, it's a worrisome thing when citizens are rendered impotent, they are rendered defenseless. You see, if we're going to agree that we have to empower these institutions, we have a responsibility to ensure that we provide ordinary citizens with remedies against these institutions so that their fundamental rights could be protected. And that's the crux of the difficulty sometimes I have. And I have to tell you, Mr. Speaker, that I have developed a sharper appreciation of this because of my re-entry into legal practice, because I see the defenselessness all the time. All the time. You see the defenselessness when applications are made to government bodies and their favorite thing is not to respond, ever reply to you. And puts the individual, if they are serious about their complaint, to apply to a court, first of all, for mandamus to compel that government body to make a decision. That's not fair. It cannot be right if you have legislation that allows you to make an application to submit a complaint, and then the authority concerned refuses to take into consideration what your complaint is and to give you a response. And they're pretending you don't exist. Because they know that the vast majority of people are poor people in this country and can't pay a lawyer to go one step further. And that is why I have never been too keen on the hegemony of the financial unit, financial supervisory unit, with a range of powers extended to it in legislation like this. I'm sorry. Regardless of what you're telling me, I have great difficulty with it under the guise of what happened with COVID or under the guise of world financial. This has been the excuse of institutions like the central bank and the rest of them. And we fall for it. We fall for it all the time. We take the bait all the time. And we're not looking at ordinary people to see how we protect them from this arbitrary exercise of power and authority. And I'm not blaming the government. I'm not blaming the government. And that's my issue. So when I see the plethora of powers given to that body in this legislation, I feel I have to take a step back and ask, well, what is all this in aid of? The fourth problem I have, Mr. Speaker, is the composition of the appeal tribunal. You know, we have a strange concept of what is fair and what is just and so on. And we go to the other extreme. And I suspect the minister had no leeway there. The credit unions must have insisted on it. You know, they have chosen in this legislation to have the Governor General appoint the appeals tribunal, the chairman and the members of the appeal tribunal. Why? Why are you involving the Chief Justice in a matter like in ordinary legislation like this? What for? Why is it that the minister can't have the authority? Once you give the minister the criteria by which the minister should act, I do not support this notion that you strip ministers of rightful ministerial authority. The passion seems to be to strip ministers of their responsibility to represent people and to act in government and to pursue what was agreed with the electorate.
Member for Viewwood South, you said the Governor General, or is it the Chief Justice?
The Chief Justice, Mr. Speaker. Well, good for you, you're listening. Good for you, you're listening. Well, with varying degrees of intensity, but never mind. So, Mr. Speaker, what are you getting the Chief Justice involved in a matter like that to appoint members of a tribunal? What for? It's not I have issues about integrity of Chief Justice. You putting a Chief Justice on a search to go and find out who are members who have had experience in a credit union or whatever to be a member of an appeal tribunal. What is this all about? And I have never seen a thing like this relentless passion of this chamber and its previous, in its previous incarnation, to just voluntarily give up ministerial authority of one kind or another to all kinds of bodies and to all kinds of entities. One of these days, you all will vote yourselves out of existence. And you want to do it, you're not even going to know that's what you're doing. Yeah, but it's been done all the time, day by day, whittling on the power and the authority, day by day, day by day, day by day. And then some bizarre things are happening, and that we are relocating some of that power to civil servants, and they're causing havoc with the legislation that they have, rendering this country almost unmanageable. I mean, I had a minister, when her minister makes her comments about this legislation, about efficiency, then she uses the word bureaucracy. I said to myself, well, she's probably telling me that not to worry, there's less bureaucracy. Not in this. The bureaucracy in this has been intensified. It has become even more complex. And if you want, I can take you through chapter and verse in it to show you how complex it has become. You have given the registrar extraordinary powers to make extraordinary decisions on members of credit union. What we are doing is to rob in these entities of what they were intended to do. That's all we are doing. So, Mr. Speaker, I express concerns on a philosophical level, on philosophical underpinnings. I express concerns as a matter of history. I applaud the fact that the minister consulted widely. And in fact, when the first version of the bill came into or circulated, I did alert the Attorney General and say, look, this bill requires major readjustment. And I'm happy to see that some of these readjustments have been done. I wish, though, Mr. Speaker, and this is purely on a closing note, that the governor of the central bank and his entourage would be more interested in protecting consumers of banks than seeking to control bodies like this. He will have more impact if it deals with the outrageous behavior of some of these banks rather than to continue to whittle down on the powers and authority of credit unions who have saved the ordinary people in this country. The institutions that really saved the people of this country following COVID it's really the credit unions, who made sure that they extended the lifeline to people in the ordinary communities. But they're the ones that we were rewarding by tying their hands even more. That's what's happening. But they're the ones who saved the society, not necessarily the banks. And I'm sorry that I had a governor of the central bank was there. I wish he was in the audience so he can hear me. So he knows how I feel about this matter. What was that? He's aware. Well, he has to hear more of this thing. Go and clean up the banking sector and make sure that the rights of ordinary St. Lucians and citizens are protected against those banks. And Mr. Speaker, I have a feeling that if I were to go on an excursion and talk to you about these rights, you'll perhaps do something highly unusual. You'll remind me what this bill is all about and ask me to focus. You might then say to me, relevance member, relevance member, relevance member. And that wouldn't be nice if the Speaker have to correct the Deputy Speaker, would it? Would it? I'll spare you that, Mr. Speaker. I will spare you that. But I say, Mr. Speaker, that necessary as it is to have enacted this Cooperative Societies Bill, supportive as I am of the bill, but I have serious issues regarding the philosophical foundation and the philosophical approaches. Every piece of legislation has a philosophical underpinning to it. And my issue is that St. Lucia must never, ever be afraid to be alone, to stand apart, because we have a history to justify it. We have a history to justify it. We are different. And we have to be different. And every St. Lucian needs to know that they're different. And there's no shame in saying to the whole region that we are different. That is not our view. That's what standing on principle means. And that's what being proud means. It doesn't mean that you cease to be humble. It only means that who you are and what you are has a special place in your heart and in your mind. And you have a special view of what your country is and what your country should be. Mr. Speaker, I thank you.
Member for Castries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the member for Beaufort South, the former Prime Minister, found it strange, I don't know why, that I'd agreed with many things he said, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, 2 weeks ago I had a discussion with a member of the FSRE, and I mentioned to them they need to be vigilant, they need to ensure that things go correctly. But I also mentioned to them that they must understand that they live in a small country and they cannot import lock, stock, and barrel what they get from the developed world because someone put it in some regulations for them. And I said to them I would continue to support them, but they had to understand the peculiarities of a small society and the peculiarities of living in our region, Mr. Speaker. And we spoke about the law as it relates to cooperatives. in putting together the cabinet, I put cooperatives under the Ministry of Commerce instead of Agriculture, where it was before, just to emphasize the importance of cooperatives to St. Lucia, the importance of cooperatives to the economic development of St. Lucia. So I will not support any measure that will muzzle these cooperatives because somebody from outside says that must happen. Having said so, I think because of the volume of transactions that cooperatives handle, there ought to be some level of scrutiny, some level of oversight, but not to any level that would tie their hands, that would stop them from dealing with liquor people, that would stop them from having the flexibility, that would afford them the flexibility to do what people want, what real people want, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there is a trend, and the member from Beaufort South is right, to constantly diminish the role of elected politicians in that region. It appears once you get elected and you get into government, you become a criminal, you become dishonest, you can't make decisions, and you must be controlled. So people who never face what we face, who never have to go to a constituency office tomorrow and speak to 50, 60 people and asking you for all kinds of things, Mr. Speaker. They believe that you must be subject to their whims and fancies because they happen to go to some school or the other. But Mr. Speaker, you have to make a serious judgment call. And you have to decide how far you can reach, because if not, you get punished by the powers that be. I joked the AG about Namlock. Then there's blacklisting. Then there's correspondent banking. Then there's many to tie your hands, to handcuff you, Mr. Speaker, because someone believes that you cannot go, that you mustn't go that far without control, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I made the point about elected officials, Mr. Speaker. We are called PEPs, P-E-P, politically exposed persons, Mr. Speaker. And when you are politically exposed persons, Mr. Speaker, you are almost treated, you and your family, as if you're an outlaw. As if you're an outlaw. You can't open a bank account, you can't deposit money in the bank, you can't put your salary in. Somebody had been pestering me from a bank, Mr. Speaker, because I was a PEP. She said to me, I must show her proof of my salary. I said, my salary is in the estimates. I need to get a letter from my employer on my salary. I said, my employer is the people of Castries East. These are the things, Mr. Speaker, you have to undergo when you are in public life, Mr. Speaker. And it gets worse and worse and worse, Mr. Speaker, because apart from having to deal with opposition, and these days we have we have abnormal opposition. Apart from having to deal, you take offense to abnormal opposition? Opposition that behaves abnormally. You have to deal, Mr. Speaker, with all these pressures. And that is why this Cooperative Societies Act, we took so much scrutiny, because we had to strike a balance between oversight, a balance between scrutiny, and a balance between not allowing us to forget the ethos of the cooperative movement, Mr. Speaker. So it's a constant battle. It's a constant battle that you have to fight, Mr. Speaker, to get the balance. But unfortunately, some public officials don't seem to have the empathy to realize what you have to go through, Mr. Speaker, and how you have to do it if you want to implement policies that benefit the people who elected you, Mr. Speaker. And the sad thing is that they don't explain to the people. You are the ones left to explain to the people. It's not your business, not their business. That's the law. You go and sell it. Because in the final analysis, what's important is not the name behind Prime Minister, it's just Prime Minister or Minister. The name behind already matter. So, Mr. Speaker, I support this act, but I'm speaking in general terms as to how you have to strike a balance between what the powers that be want you to do and what is relevant in a small society, Mr. Speaker. We have that issue for discussion in the insolvency bill. We have it a while ago in the money laundering bill, Mr. Speaker. People, regular vendors, regular taxi drivers, go to the bank for $1,000 US. They want to ask them where you get it from, who sent it for you. What kind of business you in? All kinds of regular people, Mr. Speaker. They call it compliance. So, Mr. Speaker, it's a very difficult task that we have to. It's a very difficult task for us as elected officials, Mr. Speaker, because in the final analysis, the people that have to elect you do not understand what you have to go through if you have to implement the policies that will make them satisfy them, Mr. Speaker. There's something called procurement. You know, procurement, Mr. Speaker. And when you start, like this morning we had a thing from the CDB, 2022, it happened 2024. Procure, Mr. Speaker. To procure, if you want to build a wall that the hurricane just full on, you have to have, they say, you have, the Minister of Finance has the authority to do a direct award, but he hasn't got the authority to make the award. So some civil servant will have to make the award for you, because in the back of his mind, he figures it's something you're doing that's wrong. So whereas the wall is falling and the people are screaming, some civil servant tells you, you must have the procurement procedure, because the World Bank tells you, you must do that, Mr. Speaker. The World Bank, the person in the World Bank, they even know where Etang is. Nor does he care, because it is not within his lifetime, Mr. Speaker. He doesn't understand it. And when these officials come to solution, Mr. Speaker, I always say to my officials, do not fall lock, stock, and barrel for what these guys tell you. Because these guys don't understand the peculiar circumstances under which we have to administer these small islands. Small islands, 170,000 people, 100,000 people, 50,000 people. They want to implement the same rules that they have for Egypt and for these large economies, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I really hope that we can come together in a more serious way to deal with these outside influences on our country. It ties your hand, Mr. Speaker. We go in a few minutes, tomorrow, when you come back to Parliament, we have to do something called money laundering. Then later on, we have to do insolvency. You must pass it, because if you don't pass it, you're going to be in problems and you'll be penalized, Mr. Speaker. So I support that piece of legislation, but I understand that most of the times these laws are passed to control these small islands, to put them in a specific mode so that the powers that be can continue their dominance, Mr. Speaker. So as I support it, I had to make these comments, Mr. Speaker, because this is how I feel. This is what I say to my technocrats all the time, that a lot of these things that you're implementing were not made for us, they're just made to control us, Mr. Speaker. And to diminish all the time the influence and the power of elected officials. elected officials become, all of a sudden, because you become elected, everything drops. But sometimes, I must say both sides of the coin. Sometimes elected officials cause that on their own. By the way they behave. They cause people to treat us like that because of the way they themselves behave, Mr. Speaker. So I must always say both sides of the coin. So, Mr. Speaker, it's a sad situation, a situation that the member for Viewfort South always speaks about. But the problem is, what is the solution? Do you exclude yourself and get punished, or do you try to find a way to follow what they call the rules for you to survive? So you can't get blacklisted, you can't get all this. Mr. Speaker, the AG comes to cabinet with a whole set of positions. The same people that tell you your civil service is overburdened, you have sent people home, a whole set of positions, Mr. Speaker. What do you call it? Inspection? What do you call it? Huh? A whole office. You understand? All the time. But the same people tell you have too many civil servants. Send clerks home. Send this and that home. You have enough policemen. You have too many policemen. You have too many teachers. The same people tell you that. They give you a long story. Your student teacher ratio is too low. You have too many teachers. You spend too much money on social programs. They give you a whole set of people to employ to pay massive salaries, they say, to control money laundering. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I thank you.
Minister for Commerce.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I've heard the passionate comments by the member for Viewfort South and the member for Castries East. In particular, the member for Viewfort South commented and encouraged St. Lucians to be different. And I agree with him that we are different. I don't think that's a question. Because the particular bill before us went into consultation mode for 11 years. My legal counsel who's here would tell you the heated meetings, especially with the members from the SDA Credit Union, the president of that board, Mr. Brian Samuel, the consultant, Pastor Paul, some members of the Credit Union League, Mr. Shane Felicien and Ms. Diana Leon. They argued, and more than anything else, they wanted to keep the essence and philosophy of the credit union. And we tried as much as possible to incorporate that and to have sort of a balance. I heard the member spoke about, and that is always the issue when we start calling names. It is not my intention to remove the honorable member from history. But in terms of the history, I am always amazed as to how the honorable member most times can give us a little lecture. But you know, one of the things I would like to see is the documentation of that history, because it is necessary for us going forward. Mr. Speaker, the honorable member made mention of having the Chief Justice within the bill at clause 298. This is the Chief Justice, the appointment of the tribunal. And that is actually in clause 298 of the bill, Mr. Speaker. And when I looked at it, the Chief Justice appears in clause 298, 301, 302, 303, and 304. And that is as it relates to the appeals tribunal. And maybe what I propose is to remove the word Chief Justice and to replace it by the Minister in these 5 clauses, Mr. Speaker. I believe after this amendment, the hundreds of credit union members would all be happy at our outcome, especially on the consultation that we've had to have this particular bill. Although it is the Cooperative Society bill is a harmonized bill, the St. Lucia version of it is completely different to the original bill, Mr. Speaker. I believe when we reflect on what we are doing this afternoon, it is our government, the government of the St. Lucia Labour Party, putting the people of this country first. In this particular instance, we are putting the protection of the credit union funds first. We are protecting the savings of the members, the civil servants, the police officers, the nurses, the teachers, the farmers, and the fishers, Mr. Speaker. So I want to thank members for the support, and I really believe that at the end of it, we would have a stronger credit union sector, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable members, the question is that the Cooperative Society Bill be read a second time. I now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. As many who have a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
An act to make new provision with respect to registration, supervision, regulation, governance, operation and management of a cooperative society and for related matters. Speaker, 1 minute. Okay. Yeah.
Clause 2.
Preliminary. Sorry, interpretation.
Clause 2 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 3.
Cooperative principles.
Clause 3 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 4.
Conflict of laws.
Clause 4 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Part 1, clauses 5 to 21.
Administration.
Part 1, clauses 5 to 21 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Part 2, clauses 22 to 44.
Registration and certification.
Part 2, clauses 22 to 44 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Part 3, 45 to 67.
Incorporation duties and privileges.
Part 3, clauses 45 to 67 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Part 4, clauses 68 to 128.
Governance and management.
Part 4, clauses 68 to 128 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Part 5, clauses 129 to 164.
Membership and meetings.
Part 5, clauses 129 to 164 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Part 6, clauses 165 to 184.
Business of cooperative society.
Part 6, clauses 165 to 184 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Part 7, clauses 185 to 2006.
Property and funds.
I said 2000? 206.
Property and funds of cooperative society.
Part 7, clauses 185 to 206 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Part 8, clauses 207 to 216.
Financing.
Part 8, clauses 207 to 216 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Part 9, clauses 217 to 233.
Audit and financial disclosure.
Part 9, clauses 217 to 233 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Part 10, clauses 234 to 241.
Reconstruction of cooperative societies.
Part 10, clauses 244 to 241 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Part 11, clauses 242 to 263.
Dissolution.
Part 11, clauses 242 to 263 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Part 12, clauses 264 to 293.
Examination and investigation.
Part 12, clauses 264 to 293 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Part 13, clauses 294 to 306.
Disputes.
I thought the member wanted to make an amendment.
You wanted to make it? 298? You want to make, okay, so we're there. Where they? You want to make? Yeah,
Yeah, but we are
We
now
are-
to
we are-
294 to 306.
we part, yeah, disputes, yeah. Your mic, Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I propose amendments to clause 298, 301, 302, 303, and 304 by deleting the word Chief Justice and replacing it with Minister. 298, 301, 302, 303, and 304.
Member for Social Saltibus,
Is it?
it's in committee, so you can make.
I was just seeking the guidance of the member for Beaufort South as to whether, and maybe AG, is there any room for that change to be interpreted as that there could be some prejudice? Because from what I see, if there is a dispute and it refers to the registrar then sends it to the tribunal. If the minister is responsible for appointing the tribunal, can there be room for an interpretation of prejudice from the minister and the registrar relationship? Some thoughts I will just come.
Member for Vieward South, can you put your microphone on?
Mr. Speaker, I just say to the member for Swazelle, it's worse if you leave the Chief Justice, because if you see a matter involving the membership of the appeals board comes up, it has to head to court, so that in fact what a court will be deciding is a decision made by the very Chief Justice because of this rule. So that, I mean, the evil is even greater on the side of a Chief Justice, and really no Chief Justice should be ever be involved in that kind of domestic kind of operations of a tribunal. They're there to judge, not to be involved in administrative matters like that. We shouldn't be putting Chief Justices to that kind of thing.
Any other comments on the amendment, proposed amendment? Members, there's been a motion to amend clauses 298, 301, 302, 303, and 304 to remove, wherever it exists in these clauses, the term Chief Justice and replace it with Minister. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? All right. Part 13, clauses 294 to 306 as amended, stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 14, part 14, clauses 307 to 310.
Apex body.
Part 14, clauses 307 to 310 stands part of the bill. Aye. Part 15, clauses 311 to 322.
Miscellaneous.
Part 15, clauses 311 to 322 stands part of the bill. Aye. Clause 1.
Short title and commencement.
Clause 1 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Honourable members, the question is that the committee rises and the bill be reported. I now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Honourable members, I beg to report that the Cooperative Societies Bill went through committee stage with amendments to clauses 298, 301, 302, 303, and 304. Minister for Commerce.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the report of the committee be adopted and the bill be read a third time and passed.
Honourable members, the question is that the report of the committee be adopted and that the Cooperative Society Bill be read a third time and passed. I now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Be it enacted by the King's Most Excellent Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the House of Assembly and the Senate of St. Lucia, and by the authority of the same as follows. This Act may be cited as the Cooperative Societies Act 2024.
Minister for Commerce.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to present for first reading a bill shortly entitled Real Estate Brokers and Agents.
Real estate brokers and agents.
Minister for Commerce.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this bill be presented for second reading at the next or subsequent sitting of this Honorable House.
Member for Dennery North and acting leader of government business.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House be adjourned until Monday, the 16th of September at 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Honourable members, the question is that this Honourable House do stand adjourned until 3 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the afternoon of Monday, the 16th of September. Or today's Tuesday. And now for the question, as many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Sitting adjourned.
All rise.
Fines by the insurance company. For example, there was a clause that said on the presentation of your audited cost, every day is $50,000. So when we explain to see that there are only X amount of audit information. Audit insurance company might charge $50,000. Audit to select, you know what, these are others, and we've even audited. And the act the registrar, any leeway in the exception. So you get them to fight. Because you're not taking all security circumstances.
Yes.
But am I bound to close past you? Because the all first security
Consider to
Noise alone I am.
L'autre session pour lundi, c'est lundi et bien mardi, excusez-moi. C'est lundi, ok, c'est 16. C'est 16 septembre, nous avons ici à 2h après-midi. Eh bien, nous sommes bien contents, comme nous avons dit, nous avons dit en différentes places à Kaikonsit, il finit bien bonnet, puisque là, il y a un match, c'est jouer CPL, il y a un après-midi, et qui est capable, c'est même pas le voulait aller supporter ces Kings là, en dedans match là, et bien jouer ça là. Et bien, c'est ici, nous avons dit merci un peu, non, Virgil?
Yeah, I'm Virgil. We will be back here tomorrow when the Senate meets to debate most of the motions and bills that were passed here today. So on behalf of the entire GIS team, I'm Virgil Yonti.
Michael Gaspar, nous avons dit, et nous avons